I'm often asked, how can I grow enough vegetables to sustain myself with them throughout the whole year? In this video, I'm going to tell you exactly how myself and Mrs. W do this. Hello and welcome back to the No Dig Norfolk Gardener. Now, there are a number of strategies that you can use in order that you have vegetables to eat all year around. But the overarching principle of all of it is to have healthy soil. Now, as you know, we use the no dig method. And in my opinion, over the years that myself and Mrs. W have been gardening, it's a great way to grow food. It's less work for me. It's great for the soil life that do all that work for me, turning that compost into nutrient-rich soil for us to grow our vegetables in. And the reason why you need your soil to be in good heart is because to be able to keep yourself in vegetables, you're going to need to grow more than one crop in any one plot. One thing that's been proven to me over the last 2 or 3 years is that you need to have some kind of flowers or shrubs in and around your plot, because they really do help to attract pollinators, which you're going to need, and also those insects that will go after the pests. And ever since we introduced flowers into our plots, thank you Mrs. W.
You're welcome. I like pretty things.
We've steadily grown more and more. They don't take up a huge amount of space. But what I have seen is that there is a noticeable reduction in pests. Yes, of course we still get pests. We still see black fly on things, we see white fly on things, green fly. But it's amazing when I walk up this garden through the plots and I can see the ladybirds eating away. I can see the hoverflies. They're all doing the work that we need them to do, which means that we have to do less work trying to get rid of the pests. The other thing, of course, that you're going to need is plants. So always be sowing. Have plants ready and available so that whenever one of your beds become available, you've got something to go in there straight away. Especially here in the UK, because the traditional growing season is actually really quite short. For a lot of people, it will run from February until October. But then what are you going to have in your garden after that? Unless you've actually got plants available and ready to go in your plots, there isn't going to be anything else. You have cabbages that are coming ready right here and now. But before they were here, we had the claret purple sprouting broccoli, which we didn't actually take out of here until almost May, did we?
No.
But without these plants being sown and being ready to go in, they wouldn't be available to us now. Brassicas are a staple of the winter diet, especially things like Savoy, because they can withstand the cold temperatures. They also stand in the ground for a long time. However, myself and Mrs. W couldn't just lift off a cabbage or a cauliflower, because once you've taken the head, that's it. It's gone. So we use a strategy whereby we try and find plants that will give us multiple harvests. We did a Calibri's grow along earlier this year. And in the early part of the year, what I do is I take the central head and that's it. I'll have those plants out because I want to put something else in its place. But these that was transplanted back in June, myself and Mrs. W have eaten all of the main heads. But what it does do, it throws up some lovely side shoots. And it will do this for 6 weeks or so. Some are large, some are not quite so large.
Nice bonus crop though.
Indeed, Mrs. W. In fact, just off that one plant, I have probably a head of Calabri's broccoli.
Another head. So I have 2 heads per plant so far.
And if you're a regular follower of our channel, you'll know that I said when I planted these, I was just going to change them for the autumn where I do a whole row. And there are what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, there are 8 plants in there. And if you take one of these heads off each plant each week as they produce, this is the result. Now it is of course possible to leave your cabbages in the ground after you've harvested the main head, and they will provide some little harvests.
That's all perfectly edible, isn't it? But they will never make a big cabbage again, would they?
No. No. Whereas the Calibris, the size of the spears that they shoot up after the main head, you can see gives you so much more harvest. Purple sprouting broccoli is another. It harvests over such a long time. In here I have 2 plants of early purple sprouting broccoli, 2 plants of Rudolph, 2 plants of claret. Now each of those plants will give about 6 to 8 weeks worth of harvest. The early purple sprouting broccoli should start to give us a harvest sometime in November, probably towards the end. As we get to the end of December and into January, in comes Rudolph. And we know from experience that Rudolph crops for a very, very long time.
Yes, it does.
We're normally still eating that back end of March.
Yeah.
And then of course, towards the back end of March and into April, we get the claret. So we're getting harvest spread over many months. Not just, oh, we'll take this and that's done with. And with the variety claret, because it doesn't harvest until April time, we're still eating that in May. And that's a really troublesome time for the gardener, because that's when we go into the hungry gap. The time when you're still waiting for the current year's vegetables to give you a harvest, but there's little or nothing in the garden. A really, really valuable crop to have. And then there's the sprouts. Sprouts again, they have a very, very long holding period. Our sprouts are normally ready for us toward the end of November. And Mrs. W are normally still eating sprouts by the end of February.
Yeah.
I've actually grown more plants this year. So the harvest should extend to even longer. And then another really, really valuable crop, if you haven't grown it before, is kale. We have some dwarf curly kale here, in between the sprouts. That gives you a harvest through the autumn. It'll take a break over midwinter. It'll start to come back as the warmer weather arrives during February and we get some nice fresh young leaves. So it has a hugely long harvesting period. And you're going to need some protection. For us, it's pigeons. So brassicas in particular, they need to be covered. But there'll also be some crops, like overwintering onions, that during December you're just going to need to cover just to keep off the worst of the weather. Onions, if they get too wet, we have a really wet season in December and January, you can often lose them because they'll just simply rot. You can use things like insect netting, which we have on ours at this moment in time. keep plants protected from the elements of the weather, you can also use things like fleece or row cover. Squash is another way that you can have vegetables available to you. An amazing squash are, once these are picked, probably towards the end of September, they'll go into storage and they will store well into next year. Myself and Mrs. W many times have been eating either the curry squash or the butternuts as we approach May. It's more a question of, have we eaten them all? Have we grown enough? But again, it just means that you have those vegetables available to you. When it comes to carrots, those of you that have been following our channel all through this year, you will know that right at the very end of March, I sowed 2 rows of Norwich carrots. And you can see that's bare now. We've finished those. But I also then, at the end of, I think it was mid-May actually, I sowed another row of Norwich carrots, which are now coming to their harvest. And then at the end of June, we sowed our carrots into the Vegegar raised bed. Now you saw that I harvested some probably about a month or so ago, and they look a lovely size. They really do look great carrots. However, they are for winter. These will be what will see us through autumn. And because myself and Mrs. W also like to make all of our own stocks fresh, and we like to use carrot in our casseroles and stews, I've also sown a row of Chantenay Red, little stump carrots, ideal for dropping into casseroles and stews. Leeks, they don't take up too much space. Believe it or believe it not, there are 72 leeks in this space. Apart from tasting absolutely amazing, they also give a good onion taste. After all, they are a part of the allium family. Myself and Mrs. W, we have many onions that are in storage, and also, of course, the shallots. But just to take the pressure off of those, we have the leeks. Sometimes the onion is substituted with the leek. There are cauliflower here that are due to mature during March and April next year. So again, as we approach the hungry gap, we've got some vegetables that we will be able to harvest. I've also got a row of cauliflower in this bed that's due to mature December and January. The other strategy that myself and Mrs. W use a lot is preserving. Runner beans are great for preserving. We have many beans, and we do every year. And they're great because we can eat them nice and fresh now, and I don't have to look too much further in the garden if I want a nice vegetable. Same with the French beans. These plants will produce many more than we can eat. So Mrs. W will preserve these by freezing them. Beans freeze really very well, especially if you freeze them while they're young, so they don't get too stringy. Although, if you do watch Mrs. W's video on how to freeze green beans, you'll know she also can get those stringy bits out. So do have a look at that. And they really do freeze really well, don't they?
They do, yes. We also make runner bean chutney with them as well, which is a nice way of preserving them, isn't it?
You most certainly do. You most certainly do. And it keeps for a long time, doesn't it?
Yes.
These beetroot are now ready for their harvest, and we're picking those as and when we want them. But they are another excellent vegetable that can be preserved so that you can enjoy it later. You can freeze them, can't you, Mrs. W?
You can, yeah.
And you also pickle it, don't you?
Yes, I do. Yeah, your mum's a big fan of the pickled beetroot.
Oh yes.
And this is our first year of growing the golden burpees beetroot, isn't it? So I'm going to pickle some of that and see how we go with that. I'm going to pickle that in a white vinegar so that it keeps the colour.
And then of course there's the sweet corn. Now, sweet corn doesn't tend to last too long around here. I have 3 hungry grandchildren that absolutely love it. And then one Mrs. W that can't resist it. So most of it is eaten fresh. But Mrs. W does also do a sweet corn relish. That's really nice. Great with burgers.
Yes.
When you have a barbecue. Really do like it. Red cabbage. Often overlooked. But Mrs. W has a really lovely braised red cabbage recipe. And once that's cooked, that can then be frozen and can come out at any time that we want to use it. You can also see that we have another 3 plants that we popped in as and when the pak choi became ready in this bed. So they'll come to our harvest later on this year. And hopefully we'll have some red cabbage for Christmas.
Yes.
Parsnips are another really valuable vegetable. They don't take up too much room. They get quite large. And actually, when I harvest one of these, that'll do 2 or 3 meals for us, won't it,
Yes,
Mrs. W?
yeah.
And there are probably 10 in this row.
Yeah.
They don't need to be taken out of the ground. The only time you need to be concerned is if you want one and you know that there's going to be quite a harsh frost. Clearly you need to harvest that before that frost arrives. And then just in this bed next door, we have winter cabbages, we have some more Calibris, broccoli, which should give us some heads as we get to November. But one very often overlooked crop is kohlrabi. Kohlrabi has a nice cabbagey sort of taste. It's great to use in salads, grated raw. Also makes a nice cooked vegetable. And I also really like it dropped into the casseroles that Mrs. W makes as a vegetable. And kohlrabi can extend that season because it doesn't take that long to grow. You can be sowing it from February all the way up to August. And 8 to 12 weeks, it's of a harvestable size for you to be able to use. If you have undercover growing spaces, and myself and Mrs. W are very lucky because we have a greenhouse and we also have this polytunnel. All the summer crops have done really quite well in here, but all too soon these will be taken out. By the time we get to October, this will change completely. I've sown some more beetroot. Now, it's difficult to grow beetroot outside over the winter months, but it will grow in here where it's that little bit warmer and they're not subject to the frosty, cold conditions. Carrots also. You saw last year that we sowed some carrots in here and we had some lovely early harvests. And the beauty about those carrots is that they were available to us from April onwards. The carrots outside, after I'd sown them in late March, we weren't going to be able to harvest those until at least June. But going back to that hungry gap again, what vegetable can you have from your garden at that time of year, May, June? Those carrots definitely helped, didn't they, Mrs.
Yes,
W?
they did, yes. Definitely a good bonus.
Spring onions are going to go in here. They'll overwinter and they'll be available to us round about the same time, around about late March to mid-April, as when they'll be of a harvestable size. And also I'm going to be growing some spring cabbages in here. They're ready just that little bit earlier for us in here. I'm also going to be planting some outside in the plots. In fact, I have some ready now that are ready to go into their final growing positions. They'll be ready just that little bit later. But if you get to a point where you really do want a nice vegetable, you don't have to wait for those to heart up. You can use them as spring green. So again, they can be an extended harvest. Every other one use a spring green, leaving the other to heart up. Lettuces will be going into the greenhouse.
And spinach.
And spinach. And they'll give you small harvests from October onwards. Then they'll slow right down as we go through December and January. But as we get to February, they start to grow away again. And all we do is just have the leaves from them that are available. If you've got enough plants, you can get yourself a nice meal. And then they then go on to heart up right, probably, when did ours heart up last year? Probably about April time is when we took those out, wasn't it?
Yes.
Just before
Yeah.
the tomatoes went in.
We had a really good harvest of spinach during March.
Yes,
But really, really good harvest of spinach in March.
We really did. I'll also be using this space to actually be growing some potatoes, because the frosty weather will be kept off them and we'll get that harvest just that much earlier. Now the chilies are starting to ripen, and so are the peppers. And we have many. So what we can eat fresh we shall, but then the rest we shall actually use our dehydrator, shan't we?
Yes, we have. Well, you bought one for your birthday this year, so we're in the middle of experimenting with things. But definitely, I'm going to try drying some chilies.
Yeah.
And I always freeze the peppers to add into things.
Yeah.
I froze the chilies whole last year, and that's quite a good way to do it, because you can quite easily then chop them up, get the seeds out while they're still frozen. I think. So that's quite good. And obviously all the tomatoes that, you know, we still have quite a lot of tomatoes. We're still making pasta sauces and passatas and things. So, and we're going to also use some of those in the dehydrator to do some like sun-dried tomato type things. So.
Well, then once we've sort of got a handle on the dehydrating, we'll bring some videos to you so you can see how it's done and then how we go on to use them.
Yeah.
Coupled with this, if you can, like we do, use the multi-sown method for the vegetables that can be multi-sown, then you can grow more in the space that you have. That's true of onions, beetroot, spring onions, turnips. That reminds me, Mrs. W, I've got some turnips to put in the ground.
Yes, you have. Yes.
Now, there is a wealth of knowledge on our channel. We've made many videos over the years. So I do urge you sometimes to go back and watch some of the ones we did maybe a year or two ago. Yeah, for sure, I was a little bit more nervous and didn't speak so well in front of the camera. But there's a lot of stuff that we've covered in those videos. You'll come across some of Mrs. W's recipes that maybe you saw initially but have now forgotten about. And other techniques, how we multi-sow, the covers we use, how we look after our no-dig beds to keep our soil in good health. Do leave us your comments and let us know how you feed yourself all year, if you do that. And if this has inspired you to try to grow as much of your own vegetables as you can to enjoy all year round, let us know about your plans. Because without a bit of planning, none of this happens. Do have a great gardening week. We shall see you on the next one.